Okay, I'm doing a review on this game, so it's only mandatory that I do this at the beginning. Here it goes. Hello everyone, David here. In my ever-growing quest to get back into fighting games, the video game genre that I grew up with, here I am to review the reboot of Mortal Kombat. Now, as you can tell, this is the complete edition, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about all the bonus stuff that I came with at the end of the review, but for now, let's go ahead and talk about the core game. Core, with a K. See what it is? NetherRealm's reboot of the beloved franchise brings all your favorite characters from the new and the old together to face off against each other in the most deadliest, ultimate Mortal Kombat to date. Now, I have never owned a Mortal Kombat game. I've played them here and there, but mostly when I'm like at a friend's house and we fight off each other on the PlayStation, like things like that. But I've never owned like every single Mortal Kombat game and played them from beginning to end, so I don't know a whole lot of the story. So what I did is I looked up a retrospective on the story of the Mortal Kombat games, and basically what NetherRealm decided to do with the reboot is to take at least the majority of the story of the first three Mortal Kombat games and compile them together to make one rather lengthy story mode for a fighting game in this reboot. And that's the thing, this story mode took me about 6 hours to complete, and that's pretty remarkable for a fighting game. And it's a Mortal Kombat game, so is it over the top and cheesy and melodramatic? Yes, you know, the voice work, the story, the plot, everything is just so over the top and ridiculous. But it's a hell of a lot of fun. My only complaint would be that because it's three stories together, they didn't really tailor the points where you can kind of tell that the first game ended, at least the story for the first game ended, and then the story for the second game begins. Because there's certain scenes when something happens, and then something would happen in the next scene that would kind of contradict what happened in the previous scene, and that shows where they tailored and sewed these stories together, and it shows during those points in the game. And I'm not a huge fan that you can't skip over the cutscenes, especially when you have already played the match and you just happen to lose, and then you turned off the game, and then you boot it up the next day, and you still have to watch that same cutscene again. But the only thing redeemable about that is that you get to witness the amazing graphics in this game. The graphics really hold up very well, and they use almost every sort of in-game model in the actual cutscenes. And not only does it hold up very well and it's beautiful to look at, but the characters are designed very well, bringing a rather over-the-top and realistic approach to these characters and then mixing them very well. And they came off as really great-looking characters. Really great-looking. And of course, NetherRealm couldn't help themselves but throw in a little bit of nostalgia in there with some classic sound effects and music. Get over here! But my favorite aspect of the Mortal Kombat reboot would have to be the gameplay. Almost every single fighting mechanic feels very nuanced and balanced. And what I loved about it the most is the fact that it's not like a frenetic fighter like Marvel vs. Capcom, where you just get frustrated and you start to button mash, because you almost have no choice but to figure out certain combos and avoid button mashing. Because if you button mash with specific characters in this game, all those characters are going to do is just throw a couple punches and then take like a really half a second breather before pulling off another combo, and that kind of makes you think in order to be able to use some of these combos that you have to learn or somewhat learn in order to be able to fight using your character. Basically what I'm saying is that it has its own little pace so that you figure out combos, and it's not like you have to go down the list and be like, okay, it's up, down, circle, square, blah, 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 blah. It's not as tedious as that. Basically what I did is that I started off by button mashing with a couple of these characters, especially the ones that I've never played as before, and I tried to figure out a certain combo by landing upon it accidentally. But when I figured out a particular combo that I was a huge fan of, and I noticed that it dealt a great deal of damage, while at the same time feeling comfortable to pull off, I tried to repeat that same combo again and again until I eventually learned it without having to go to the combo list. And I would use this sort of method in order to be able to memorize some of these combos. And just pulling off all these different combos and mixing them with special moves and finishing moves is just one of the delightful things about the really balanced gameplay mechanics in the Mortal Kombat reboot. It gives you the opportunity to learn. It gives you the opportunity to become a better fighter, especially with the characters that you get to choose. And every single one of these characters, of course, has their own suitable fighting style. So that way you can play as all the characters and then by the end figure out which ones you like to play with and which ones you don't like to play with. And speaking of these characters, the roster is really good too, mixing in newer characters with some of the old classics like Scorpion and Sub-Zero. And like I said at the beginning of this review, I wasn't too familiar with some of these characters because I haven't played every single Mortal Kombat game, but they felt welcomed and they complemented really well with some of the older classic characters that I'm very familiar with. And it just made up for a really well-built roster. And of course, it's not a Mortal Kombat game without fatalities. The fatalities in this game are great. Granted, there were a couple where they started to get just a little repetitive. I lost count of how many times a certain character started to just chop off heads and not even get creative with it. But the ones that are more creative are so brutal and just awesome to see. My favorite would have to be Noob Saibot's. Whoa. And all of these fatalities come with their own little spin-offs, like the babalities, where you're like a baby or something, or the stage fatalities, where the character utilizes the stage in order to pull out their fatality. But of course, one of the most impressive aspects of the brutality of the gameplay would have to be the X-ray mechanic. Now, I'm not entirely sure if this is new to the franchise, and if it is, it's a very great addition, but if it's not, I feel like they tweaked it and made it better, because pulling off an X-ray move, it's just awesome. I mean, seeing the bones break and the vital organs bulge, it's just awesome. Now, I cannot stop talking about the gameplay without pointing out what might be the single really bad thing about this game that I may or may not be wrong about, because it might just be me, it might just be in my head, or it might actually be a huge flaw in the game, and that would be the difficulty level. I don't know what it was, but for some reason, in the story mode in particular, I didn't see this happening in the other modes, which I'll talk about in a second, but in the story mode, I felt like the game would dumb itself down after I had died like 2 or 3 times. That way I can then progress in the story. And granted, there's a part of me that wanted to see the next thing in the story, as over the top as it may be. And for that brief second, I was welcome to the idea of the game dumbing itself down so that I can at least progress. But then another part of me felt like I felt dishonored. I felt dishonored knowing that the game let me win. And if it did, I'm like, wow, this, I don't know, I feel like I was just called stupid. At least other games recently ask you if they want to dumb down the game. Like if you're losing in a certain game, the game would actually open up a little menu where it says, do you want to change the difficulty level for this game? Because obviously you're having a little bit of trouble, which that itself is actually kind of insulting, because it's almost like the game is saying, you want me to hold your hand? But if I'm correct, and it's not just in my head, this game just goes ahead and does it without even asking me. What the hell? But so far, this issue is mostly prevalent in the story mode and not in the other modes, which let's go ahead and talk about. The game comes with some of the basic modes, like the ladder match, in which you fight 10 different opponents as you go up in the ladder, and of course as you go up they get progressively harder. And then you got versus, in which you fight somebody locally or online, which I will say that the game put me up against some really fair opponents that matched my rank, and they weren't so difficult. I actually got my fair share of victories in the online versus mode. But the 2 modes that surprised me the most, that may or may not be returning from the previous Mortal Kombat games, would have to be the Challenge Tower and the Crypt. The Challenge Tower is a tower filled with 100 challenges, and it's either a challenge in which you have to play as a certain character and defeat a certain opponent, or you play as a certain character and you have to do a certain amount of things that feel like little mini games, or these other challenges that you can actually do in a separate mode, like Test Your Luck, Test Your Might, Test Your Strike, in which you need to not necessarily fight, but test out your actual skills as a player, whether it be to keep your eye on a specific target or move as fast as possible, that kind of thing. And I found this challenge tower to be surprisingly addictive. I actually wanted to keep going and be like, okay, what's next, what's next, what's next? And they made sure to change it up, because almost no challenge feels the same, and every 5 or so challenges they would throw in that little Test Your Luck, Test Your Might, which leads me to my only other nitpick would have to be that because they offer those challenges separately and you can do them without having to do the challenge tower, they feel kind of redundant when you do them by themselves, because you're already doing them in the challenge tower, so I feel no need to go over there and do them by themselves. Especially when the only way to unlock the next difficulty of that challenge would be to do it in the actual challenge tower. But the other mode that surprised me is the Crypt, which is like this huge like extra lobby that takes place in a graveyard, and basically what you could do in this graveyard is spend all the in-game currency that you earned, whether it be in the story or in the challenge tower or in the ladder tournaments. You earn money after every victory, and every achievement that you accomplished throughout the game. And you can use this money to unlock different content within the crypt, from different skins to music to artwork, a lot of things. And there's so much content there to explore that it actually gives the game much more replay value than it already had. And what I definitely know is a returning thing from the previous Mortal Kombat games are the combat codes, which you input in the versus modes, because both players need to be in accordance with what combat code you need to input, which is a little frustrating for me, because the only way to do that is to actually know the other person and tell them like, hey, you put in this and I put in that. But when you pull it off, it adds just a whole new dimension of fun to the game. And it adds different things like headless combat, where both of your opponents don't have heads, which is really fun to see, but also other benefits that may or may not be in your advantage, like poisoned health or the ability to only use special attacks and nothing else. And these combat codes not only made things much more fun, but they retained that arcade feel that we've known Mortal Kombat to have. Overall, NetherRealm's reboot of Mortal Kombat is definitely the way to reboot a game. Whether it be a fighting game or an action-adventure game, this is one of the definitive examples to do it right. And it's so far one of my favorite games to play in this current generation. I give Mortal Kombat a 9 out of 10. But because of the possibility of there being that rather significant flaw of the game dumbing itself down without asking me after I have lost a certain amount of times, I'm going to go ahead and in parentheses, I'm going to put low 9 in front of the 9. It's a low 9. So now real briefly, I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of the bonus content that the Complete Edition came with. It came with about, 15 previously released classic skins that are part of the unlockable content in the original game. And these classic skins is exactly what it says. It's the skins from the original Mortal Kombat games. And I haven't unlocked all of them, but I've seen some images and they definitely look like the characters that you grew up with in the original Mortal Kombat games, especially the arcade ones. But along with that, you also got 4 additional characters. You got Kenshi, who is this blind assassin that uses this rather technologically advanced sword, which is actually pretty cool. You got Rain, who is a member of the Lin Kuei, which is the same group that Scorpion and Sub-Zero are a part of, so he has that similar fighting style. And speaking of similar fighting styles, you got Scarlet, who is also a female ninja assassin, just like Katana and Jade and Melina. And then you got the strangest addition to a game, let alone a fighting game, and that is Freddy Krueger. Now this is the 2010 Jackie Earle Haley Freddy Krueger, not the Robert Englund Freddy Krueger, but he's still a fun character to play with. And he has a rather cool fatality that is a definite throwback to the original Nightmare on Elm Street. Johnny Depp. That's all I'm saying. And before I forget, this is the PS3 version, so if you buy the PS3 version, you actually get to play as Kratos as an exclusive. And he plays like you would expect him to be. He's rather slow, but he's very powerful, using his Blades of Chaos and that Sword of Olympus as his fatality. Is a really cool character to play with. So if you guys enjoyed my review of Mortal Kombat and would like to purchase the game, be sure to use the link in the description below. It would really help me out a lot. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to subscribe to my channel for more videos. And as always, take care.